Hi everyone, my name is Sam, and today I'm going to walk you through a second example of a program that I've written in Python using the graphics.py library. And in the first video that I did, I talked about where you could go to download graphics.py, and if you need that information, I'll put a link down in the description of this video. But for this program, what I did was I created a graphics window object with a body mass index calculator. And what body mass index is, it's a measure of a person's body fat based on their weight and their height. And I created a body mass index method here to do the calculations for that. And I'm not going to get too much into that today, but basically what you need to know is that the number produced by these calculations, which are fairly simple, is then compared to these rankings down here. And these rankings are from the CDC. These are the rankings that they use to determine whether or not a person is underweight, healthy weight, overweight, or obese. So outside of this part here, we basically want to concentrate on the graphics.py part. So where we want to begin is we want to import our graphics library. And then once we come into our main method here, we want to call our graphWin method to create our graphics window object, give it a title, body mass index, which you can see up here in the corner. And then we want to set the width and the height. And then we go on to set the background color. And then we are going to draw our first line of text and our first input box at these points here. So we pick our points, 150 and 50. So this would be considered the X coordinate. This would be considered the Y coordinate. And I'll come back to those in a second, but the basic steps are that we call the text method, type out our text, set the text color, and we call the draw method to draw that text object. And then for the entry box, this corresponding entry box right here, we call the entry method after picking a point. We set the size, right here we set it to 5, and then inside the entry box, you can leave it blank, but if you want to set the text, you call the set text method. And then you call the draw method to draw that entry box within the graphics window object. Now, for this second and third line here, we're basically repeating those same steps with a couple of little differences. So just to quickly go through it, we call the text method, set text color, call the draw method. Call the entry method, set the text inside, call the draw method. So we're repeating these steps. Where the main difference is that you want to pay attention to. Okay, let me just set this up for a second. In our first line of text here, I called your attention to the coordinates, the X coordinate and the Y coordinate. So for this first line of text, the center point here, okay, we move over to the right. Our X coordinate is 150. That's the center point of this first line of text. We're moving down 50 points, and that is the Y coordinate of our first line of text. Now, this might be a little confusing, but this is the main difference between a graphics window object and a regular graph when we're talking about coordinates. In a regular graph, this bottom corner here would be our 0, 0 point, which means that as you move to the right, your X coordinates would increase, and as you move up, your Y coordinates would increase. But in a graphics window object, it's different. This still remains your 0 point for your X coordinates. So as you move to the right, your X coordinates will increase. Okay, so for example, up here, as we move to the right, okay, this center point here, we moved from 0 to 150. But where it differs from a regular graph, this is your 0 point in a graphics window. So we're moving down 50 points. And then for our second line of text, you can see here that our Y coordinate for both the line of text and the entry box has increased to 100. So we're jumping 50 points each time. So we move down, this is 50 right here for our Y coordinate. We move down again, we're at 100 for our next set of Y coordinates. And then we move down again, and we're at 150 for our third line of text and our third entry box. So it's important to understand that concept when placing different objects within a graphics window. And it's also important to understand that concept when drawing different objects. So for example, these two buttons down here, I decided to use a rectangle, but you can choose any shape you like to make within the graphics object for a button. So when making a rectangle object, you have to pick the two opposite corners of the rectangle, the two opposite coordinates of that rectangle, and those are the parameters that the rectangle method takes in order to create a rectangle object. So for this button right here, our first point, the x coordinate is 100 and our y is 200. So this is 100, 200 over here. And then our opposite point is at 200, 250. So we moved over 100 points and down 50 points to get to 200, 250 for our opposite corner. We give those points to the rectangle method, creates the rectangle object, and then from there we can fill the color that we want and find the center point and then enter text to place in the center of the button. And then we call the draw method to draw both the rectangle object and to draw the label, to draw the text inside of the button. And then we repeat that process for the second button, but we do something a little different here, where we call the clone method to clone the first rectangle object. So the first rectangle object, you can see up here, we called it rec. We take that object, we call the clone method on it to create our second rectangle object. And then we call the move method to move it over 150 points to the right, but our y coordinate remains at 0 because we want to keep the same alignment. We want to keep the same alignment on the y coordinate. We just want to move it over 150 points. And then from there, you can get the center of that cloned object, set the text inside of it, and then you call the draw method to draw that cloned object and draw the text inside of it. In the first rectangle, we specifically typed out the points in these two lines right here. We're going to need the opposite points for this second rectangle object in order to do the next part of the program. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to call the get P1 and get P2 method to get the endpoints for this cloned rectangle object and then assign it to these variables, to m and to n. And the reason why we need to do that is because we want to assign different tasks to these different buttons. In this first button, we want to assign it the task of calling that body mass index method, which does all the calculations and assigns you your ranking. And then it passes the number and the ranking, the message, to these variables. And then we set the text of this third output box, this third entry box, to the number and the message. And we need to differentiate that from this second button here, which just closes the window. And we also want to make sure that no matter where else you click, so right now I'm clicking as I move this mouse around, and I want to make sure that nothing happens. So you can click inside the box, nothing happens until you enter some text or some numbers. So let me enter a height and a weight. And it's only when I click this button that we get the output that we're looking for. If I click anywhere else, nothing changes with this output. So you can see that as I change the numbers, it's only when I click inside this first button that the output changes here, our desired output. And then once I click this second button here, it quits and closes the program. So let me just open that back up again. All right, so how did we do that? Again, we have to pay attention to the coordinates of these two buttons. So entering into this for loop, anytime we click the mouse, we get the mouse event and we assign the coordinates of that mouse event to this P variable right here. So if I click here, if I click here, the program gets the coordinates of that mouse click and assigns it to this P variable. We enter down into this portion here. So let's just walk through step by step. So we have the P variable here, and we get the X and we get the Y coordinate of that P variable. And then we have to compare it. So in this first line here, it has to be greater than the X coordinate of 0.7 and less than the X coordinate of 0.8. So in our first rectangle object, the X coordinate of 0.7 is 100, and the X coordinate of 0.8 is 200. So it has to be greater than 100, but less than 200. So that means that this range right here, we are greater than 100 and less than 200 as far as the X coordinates. But you can see that when I click here, nothing happens, okay? So we need to meet a second condition, which is that for the P variable, we have to get the Y coordinate of the P variable and then compare it again to the Y coordinate of 0.7 and the Y coordinate of 0.8, which is 200 and 250. So we need to be in this range here. So we need to be greater than 200, but less than 250. So we need to be in this range. But you can see that when I click on both these parts, nothing happens. It's only when we are meeting both sets of conditions that if I type something into these entry boxes, 74, and let's say 205, it's only when I am clicking inside this box right here that satisfies both sets of conditions that I get the desired output that I'm looking for. And the same goes for the quit button. It is only when I click inside this area here, okay, because remember, we got the opposite points of this rectangle object and assigned it to variables m and n, and then we compare the x and y coordinates of m and n to the x and y coordinates of the P variable, the place where we're clicking, the mouse event. And it is only when we satisfy both conditions that it closes the graphics window object. So that was just another example of how to use the graphics.py library. I definitely hope you learned something by watching this video, and I definitely enjoyed making it, and hope you have a great day.